Welcome to episode 99 of the Half Point Per Podcast. I'm your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie, and producer, Johnny Pham. Guys, we've got a big show this week. We've got a couple of small fantasy topics we're going to start off with, but we've got a fun divisional weekend of football on deck. We had a very fun wild card weekend on deck. I mean, Dalton, what was your favorite moment, or like a moment that sticks out to you from Wild Card Weekend?
Live betting the Chargers at plus 1,700 at half at $25.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Live betting for all the favorites, like the heavy favorites, like live betting the Bengals, the Bills when they're favorited by so much. It's very stressful, but it was fun to live bet.
Well, live betting the Bills to do much of anything besides win by 3 did not work out.
Nope, but it was a fun weekend.
It was. I mean, that Jaguars Chargers game. Dalton said plus 1,700. I think I saw it got to, was it plus 2,800, Johnny?
It might have in the third quarter when the Chargers had a drive.
Yeah, I think the highest was plus like 28. That. I think almost 3,000.
Which is just, I wonder what the longest odds have been for an in-game comeback before in an NFL game like that. I wonder what it was for the Super Bowl with the Patriots and Falcons. Like that is the one that feels pretty comparable. But man, I mean, the funny thing is though, as soon as the Jaguars scored before half, right? Like the Chargers went 3 and out, and the Jaguars scored before half. We were all like, the three of us were like, okay, like they could actually come back, and it's just so Chargers to blow that lead. And it's so Chargers of Brandon Staley to say, well, we didn't get out coached in the first half. It's like, well, guess what, buddy? You guys are sitting at home because you're up 27-0 and couldn't hold the lead. And, this wasn't like the Chiefs and Colts back in the day where you have Jamal Charles get hurt. You have guys going down left and right.
Dwayne Bowe get hurt.
Yeah, Dwayne Bowe gets hurt. Like, you have no receivers left, no running backs. It's like, nope, everybody's still healthy. You just can't run the ball at all with Austin Eckler.
Well, except Mike Williams.
Mike Williams not healthy. That was a last week problem, and so probably enough about the Chargers. But we can only hope for as entertaining of a weekend this weekend in every game but the Chiefs game. Well,
I was going to say
it's nice and boring.
Saturday at 3:30 of a short 2-hour game, in and out, real quick, nothing crazy.
That Bills-Dolphins game was maybe the longest non-overtime NFL game I've ever watched in my entire life. And I almost, it was too much work, not enough time situation for me this week. I almost went and clipped like a 5-second video of a ref calling a delay of game and just leaving the podcast silent in an intro for like 5 seconds. Because, I mean, Miami got called for like 4 or 5 delay of games. And of course, the one on 4th and half a yard where they could have picked it up and kept driving to maybe win the game, a delay of game. Did you guys ever see McDaniel's explanation for kind of what happened there? Did either of you see that? I don't think I saw it to the group.
What was it?
I did, yeah.
So their coaches in the press box thought they had a first down. And so they told Mike McDaniel that they had a first down. And so they were getting a first down call ready. Later realized, it's 4th down. And so they were just late getting the call in because they thought they had a first down.
Yep, and they had like different personnel in too. And then it was just...
Which, I mean, would explain a lot because like they were out there in a pistol, and like that play, if they did get it off, was going to be a negative 4 yards. Like that, it was going nowhere. But
that Bills Miami game especially was probably some of the worst football I've made myself watch a playoff game. It was close, which meant it was interesting, but it was bad football being played all around. I mean, Skylar Thompson might have been playing better than Josh Allen at some points. His receivers just weren't catching balls.
Yeah, and even though his receivers let him down plenty, he also wasn't playing well. His receivers had some drops, but he was like 18 of 45, or I don't know the exact stats, but it was less than 50%. So
we didn't even get Mostert. Clearly better than Jeff Wilson. With that performance Jeff Wilson put up.
They needed Raheem Mostert out there. I mean, he's a big reason besides their defense why they were able to squeak by the Jets. What was it, 9-6 on a trio of field goals to even get into that game. But you know what? A good thing for the Bengals and the Bills is last week is just a mulligan, and now they get to play each other, and hopefully for both of their sakes that they both play better. But we can't move on to to the divisional round and a fantasy topic quite yet without me giving you guys each like 30 seconds to mourn your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? Like we have to. We can't let that one just go.
I think we can. I think everyone's kind of over it by like the first quarter. It was just not even that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of knew that was going to happen. It's just, I think the grass changed. Nobody saw Dak was going to be playing this well. There's no shot that you knew that Dak was going to play this well.
Well, against the trash Buccaneers, it's not too surprising. Now, will he do it this weekend? We will see, and we will talk about that later. But first, Dalton, before we get into next week's games, I did want to at least try and get a fantasy topic at the beginning of all of these shows. One that I thought was good for today, before we get too far away from the regular season, is let's just talk about a couple of players whose fantasy finish wasn't really indicative of the ride the whole season. And what that means, pretty self-explanatory, but a guy who finished as a top 25, top 30 receiver or receiver or running back, or top 10 or so quarterback and tight end, and it may have been some big games propped him up, maybe touchdowns, in certain weeks, and a lot of weeks they weren't startable. Just when we look back, we need to have this context as to how this player actually got to this endpoint. And Dalton, I'll let you start us off with your first player you want to highlight on this short list.
Well, my first player is actually in the top 10 of wide receivers, and it was probably one of the shakiest top 10 performances I've seen at the position. And it goes to one of the sketchiest wide receivers in football for fantasy scoring. It is Amari Cooper.
Wow.
His trajectory this season was so up and down, and we're not even getting a look back from analysts yet saying, oh, what a good season, because it's so clear that the ride was horrible.
Mm-hmm. It usually is with Cooper. I feel like Cooper could be like a mainstay on this list every year, even in his years where he was like a top 5 and now 10 this year wide receiver.
Well, what's funny is 10 of his 17 performances that we're counting in this sample were outside of the top 30. So he had 7 games inside the top 30, which I would call 7 startable weeks for you. And then he had 10 games outside of this top 30. But what makes this drastically worse is he got way worse when Deshaun Watson came back. And the entire offseason talk was, well, Amari's probably going to have a rough start, but you're getting him at a discount. And once Deshaun comes back to the Browns, you're going to have like a playoff hopeful.
Yeah.
And it was the complete opposite. Once Jacoby Brissett got benched, Amari Cooper's entire ride and his entire season got worse. He had 4 straight weeks without double-digit scoring and without a touchdown, and the Browns' offense as a whole dropped off. So I think he deserves probably the top ranking mention on my list, and is definitely on the do not draft next year.
So I totally agree with that. And like I said, Cooper, it just feels like that's just his ride every year. He's just, not only was the quarterback situation, whether it was just the inconsistencies of a good backup quarterback, but not star level quarterback, or just Deshaun Watson being flat bad for 75 to 80% of the time. Like, he was good in some of the last game that he played, basically, but that's about it. Like, outside of the quarterback issues, like, Cooper himself has just been inconsistent. That's just always been his MO. So not a surprise. And he's going to have, another year of wear on the tires, another year older for a guy who's gone through a lot of injuries. So yeah, I'll be very curious to see what the Browns as a whole, what their values are. And Cooper is obviously high up on the list if they don't bring in another big time receiver in the draft or free agency, because like Cooper's he's gonna be the one. And what do we think of the offense? It'll be a fascinating discussion all offseason.
Yeah, I just think avoid all the Browns not named Nick Chubb is going to be a good offseason take for me.
Yeah, can't say I blame you. A guy that I wanted to talk about, nobody will be surprised by his inclusion on the list. And this is partially I want to talk about his season this year, and partially kind of like what you said with Cooper. I want to tell people I don't want to draft this guy.
Gabe Davis.
Next year, it is Gabe Davis.
I knew he was going to be on your list.
Is the first name on my list. He's the wide receiver 28. That's in 14 games. And it's so weird. I have a Bengal as my next guy. It's like I have to keep double checking. Okay, is this stat out? Do they include the points in the 6 minutes? Okay, no, they don't. So, and I had to keep double checking, like, okay, do his averages like boost up any higher? Actually, his average is down at wide receiver 33, so that hurts him a little bit if you just do average, because guys like Debo, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Cooper Kupp bump ahead of him in those ranks. Like, he averaged 10 points a game. He's a top 30 receiver. First of all, I think we were both correct in our Gabe Davis stance before the season, in which our stance was we really have no stance. We're in the middle. We're not like insanely low on the guy like some people are, but we're not telling you to draft him as the wide receiver 18 like some people.
I think we both had a mid to late 20s. Which is where he finished.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he wide receiver 28, averaged 10 points a game, like on the surface, like, yeah, like that's a guy, he's locked into my lineup. I feel good about him. He scored single digits in 9 of his 14 games this season. He was fewer than 6 points 6 times this season. I mean, Dalton, as somebody who had Gabe Davis on their team all season, did you ever feel comfortable putting him in your starting lineup?
After the Pittsburgh game when he was wide receiver 1 for a week. But I mean, the joke is, in that playoff performance he had in the first week of the playoffs, he finally blew up again, and I'm sure nobody was starting him
exactly
at that point. And the maddening inconsistency, it's not, like, one of the big conversation topics of the offseason was, will Gabe Davis have a good target share? He had a really good target share. His problem was he was dropping all of the targets, which is incredibly frustrating when you have the wide receiver 2 connected to the QB2 in the NFL.
He did, like, his target share was fine. So on the regression candidate show that just Johnny and I did, I think it was the week after the Chiefs game. So it was after week 6. Gabe Davis was on that list. And my thing at that point was, like, this dude has 14 catches and 4 touchdowns this season. Like, that is not going to continue, which it obviously didn't. And he was on pace for like 83 receptions, which if he was going to get to 1,000 yards, that would have been like the least in I don't know how long. And he was basically on pace to have the Mecole Hardman amount of targets. He upped it by like 10, and he missed some games, so it was a little bit more than that, like on the whole. But he ended up with 93 targets in 14 games, so like pretty good. But you would think, looking at this receiving group, like if I told you before the season that, or if I told a Gabe Davis lover before the season he finished with 93 targets, they would think, oh, well, they signed Odell Beckham Jr. or they signed somebody else that came in and took work from him at the end of the season. But he was just never really able to command targets on a consistent basis. I mean, he had 7 targets in a game twice this year. And he
one of them was week 18, if you're counting that.
Yeah, and one of I am. And one of those was when most people weren't playing anymore. And he had, I think it's 5 receptions. He only did that a couple of times, like 5 or more receptions. The dude was like pretty consistent 2, the 3, the 4 reception guy. And it's just sometimes it was for 30 yards. Sometimes it was for 150 yards because he had a 99-yard touchdown. And sometimes, like, he had a game where it was 2 catches, 15 yards, and a touchdown, because his target share, like it has every year, goes up in the red zone because he and Josh Allen have a very good red zone of rapport between the two of them. But I mean, even with the touchdowns regressing, he's a 14.5% touchdown rate, which is 13th in the NFL. He outscored, if you're looking at PPR, because that's what player profile does in these stats, his expected points per game would have landed him as the wide receiver 44 in PPR. He was the wide receiver 36. So he even outperformed probably what he should have on that volume.
Game, 100%.
Yes, that was the pit game for sure. The 99-yard touchdown, basically, you can boil it down to that play. If they bring in a receiver who people are excited about, his draft stock isn't going to be as high. But I just think if they bring nobody else in, he's going to be drafted around that same range, like a top 20 to 24 receiver. And I just don't want that. Like, Gabe Davis, to me, even if they don't bring in another receiver, he's on the list of guys that he's not going to lose his job because his role is very different from like Khalil Shakir. But a year from now, could we be talking about Shakir being the second best receiver on the Bills if they don't bring in anybody else? Like, I think it's possible, because I think Gabe Davis is a limited receiver, but he's good at what he does. But what he does is going to give you inconsistent fantasy results because he's a deep threat, big play guy. And he is very good at like the toe taps on the sidelines, like making those like in tight spaces along the sidelines type of catches. He's very good at that too. And he's not just a deep threat because he gets more receptions than like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but I don't want him as my wide receiver 2 or 3 on my team next year. I just don't.
Well, I think if you were a Gabe Davis truther or supporter coming into the season, part of your argument was he was going to get better and he was going to make improvements. And I don't think either of those were evident. I mean, he's still a hand clapper. He struggles catching the ball. He struggles tracking the ball. What he's good at is getting in the red zone and being a deep threat, which are very good things with Josh Allen. But I mean, he's going to be your quintessential better and best ball player because he's going to have those, those pit games where he gets 3 red zone looks and he converts 3 of them. But I mean, in a redraft or a dynasty league, I think he's going to be a very frustrating player to start and definitely not a guy that you want to be consistently relying on week to week.
Yeah. And I'll, talk about this more when we talk about the Bills in a bit, but the Dolphins basically said, okay, we are going to completely blanket Stephon Diggs, who had 1 target in the second half last week, and make anybody else beat us. And they did, but barely, through drops and, missed deep shots and all of that stuff that the Bills did barely pull it off. But if Gabe Davis was a better player, that strategy would have less success than it did last week. And that strategy wouldn't be tried if he were a legit number 2. I think we'll find out that the Bills aren't happy with him being their second best wide receiver. That's what I think. But going off what we know now, I don't want him next year. And if you had him this year, you hopefully got lucky and started him at the right time. Otherwise, he burned you 9 times for single digits, 6 times for less than 6 points.
Yes, I agree. And talking about a player that I think I'm going to want next year, but I think is going to have a polarizing offseason, is jumping into the next guy. I think Travis Etienne is a player who his ride was significantly worse than his outcome.
Yeah, because he was on fire for a hot minute there.
Yeah. And I mean, he finished the season as a top 20 running back in PPR. But to start the season, he has 4 straight games outside of the top 20. To end the season, and this is where the revisionist history gets scary, in the playoffs, he scored double digits all 3 weeks. So he very likely, if you still had him, he was winning you weeks. But if you go back to our, players you might want to drop episode, Travis Etienne was a player we talked about for a while, where we were wondering whether or not he was going to be getting the workload in Jacksonville. And the middle of the season, he looked really good. He came on. The Baltimore game is really the only, stain on that resume, and he left the game injured. So it's not something that we're going to hold against him. But I think if you look at his end of season results, he ends up with a 78% snap share, but he has less than 50 targets, which is where he does the work. And I think, and I said this in the group chat, Trent Baalke, the GM for the Jacksonville Jaguars, has drafted a running back every year going back to his time with the San Francisco 49ers. I don't think it's out of control to think that a running back
has, but they drafted, was it Snoop Connor this draft? So it's like they could draft a guy and he's very insignificant, or they could draft a guy in the 3rd round who is not insignificant. We absolutely we don't know.
And my concern is that, they're bringing in, I think the first pick of the draft for the Jacksonville Jaguars is likely going to be an alpha wide receiver. Never mind. They have an alpha wide receiver in Calvin Ridley.
They still may draft a receiver.
But you're going to have Christian Kirk. I expect Evan Ingram back. And then you have Calvin Ridley in this room. I think earning targets from Trevor Lawrence is going to be at a premium for Travis Etienne. Doug Peterson's never targeted running backs at a high. It's not the offense he runs. So I'm not projecting that he's not going to be a guy I want next year, but I'm going to be really concerned if he starts sneaking into that top 15 range, which I think is where we're hitting his ceiling. And it's pretty revisionist when we look at his season. When James Robinson was there, he wasn't used that often, and I know they traded him, but I could see them just as likely bringing somebody in. There's a huge free agent market at running back. It's 10 times better than wide receiver this offseason. And I just don't want us to paint roses and pictures about the end of his season where he could have won you a lot of games with an 11 and a 21-point outing, but the rest of his season was really rocky for a lot of it.
Yeah, it was. You hit all of it very well there. He started off basically unstartable, and then he had the 1 week where it was like, oh, it's a takeover happening. And it's very possible that most people didn't even start him that second week when it happened too, because a lot of times when a guy goes multiple weeks where he's not the guy, we need to see more than 1 week of him actually being the guy before we start him, unless we have injuries on our team. So he probably, I would say he's a guy that even though he finished really well, maybe the fantasy manager started him like 6 times and was happy with it, because he did have that rough stretch toward like the latter, it was like from the 50% mark to like the 75% mark of the season. It was definitely a down stretch for him, which felt bad because he was like one of my buys on the trade deadline show and did not work out. If you made the playoffs and you bought ETN, he paid off. But yeah, it was up and down, and it's unfortunate that we didn't see him get more passing game work. I mean, we talked about this on our preseason predictions kind of recap last week. It came down to week 18 for him to get through his yardage prop of 299.5 receiving. And thought
that was when we wanted to hammer.
We thought before the season, I don't remember my exact words, but I think that was like my lock of the century. Like
I believe so.
Lock of locks. Like I was all over that. Like, yeah, there's just no shot this doesn't happen. And
you're right.
I was right, but it sure almost did happen. I was not expecting it to go clear the week 18, even if the dude missed time, because he was a great pass catcher in college and just hasn't been used like that yet. So yeah, their off season will be very interesting, and I would imagine he's going to be a second round pick. He's going to be a guy that gets taken high,
which feels a little rich. I think we're doing a little bit of the DeAndre Swift revisionism with him, where we're like, well, he has it, so we think he's going to do it when we haven't seen it on the field.
Yeah, a guy that has done it did again this year, but was probably very frustrating, even for as good as he like. Joe Mixon's case for this list is so weird, because if you just look at his game log, it's like he has so many games between 9 and 15 points. He doesn't have hardly anywhere he just truly killed you. It's not like ETM where the valleys were truly, truly low. But, he was a first-round pick. You just want your first-round pick to do more than score between 9 and 15 points in like 10 of the 14 games he plays. Like he's the RB9 in half-point scoring. He's the RB12 in weeks 1 through 16, I think. The Bengals, like, they didn't really fix their offensive line, even though it seemed like they did. Like before the season, PFF had them as a top 10 offensive line. They finished the season, I don't know if you saw this, Dalton, as PFF's 28th ranked offensive line. So they just flat out, the problem just wasn't fixed again this season. It didn't really hurt Mixon's efficiency, but it didn't, like, he didn't have this efficient season like we were hoping for, because he had light boxes and a good offensive line. Number one, their offense started slow, and then number two, that he just didn't have room still. Even down the stretch, didn't have room. He was basically the same yards per carry as last year with a lot fewer touchdowns. The difference, how he made up for it, was 75 targets and 60 receptions, both career highs, I believe, for him this season. But the thing with Mixon is, like, how many weeks did he really win you this year? I count one. His 53-point week. One.
Also the week Johnny played him against me right after trading for him.
Yes.
For anybody interested.
His 53-point week, where he had about 20% of his total rushing yards, probably more like 18 to 17% if I really did the math, but had like 153 rushing yards. He had 4 of his 7 rushing touchdowns on the whole season in that one game. So, like, yeah, you won that week, but he wasn't the difference maker that you paid for with a first-round pick throughout the season. And then as we kind of forecast ahead, you just kind of worry a little. Like, I think Mixon probably has one more, like, pretty awesome year left. But this year wasn't what I would have hoped. And you just get more doubts in your mind as the guy keeps creeping up in age. And this year was just a slight drop, or maybe not even a drop off, but a slight drop off, and just not quite what we'd hoped for this year.
Well, and I'd have to look at the game logs themselves, but the one game Samaje Perine played where Joe Mixon was out, I would expect he added a significant value to that team. He played really well, and it led to him getting greater snap share. And that really did take a lot of his value later in the season. Is one of the reasons he was drafted so early. Is he's a workhorse on a top 10 offense. You want those guys, and suddenly he wasn't a workhorse. We talked about him getting a closer to a 60-40 snap share. He was taking out a lot of the pass game work, and those things became very frustrating. And the other expectation with this Bengals offense was that they were going to see more cover two. They're going to have to do some more shorter passing, and that was going to lead to more targets for Joe Mixon. And that didn't happen either.
Well, more targets did, but the issue was he only had 7 rushing touchdowns compared to 13 last season. So all that did was just make up that difference, not elevate his status. I mean, and he didn't make it up because he finished lower even on a points per game basis than he did last season. I mean, Ryan, that 3-game stretch without Mixon, and Mixon gets hurt at the beginning of the Pittsburgh game, I think. Ryan's the RB2, RB9, RB6 with 28, 17, and 18.5 points. I mean, that's better than a 3-game stretch Mixon had.
I was going to say.
So, frustrating year if you're a Joe Mixon owner, even though he had probably the best running back game of the entire season. All right, Dalton, who's your last guy?
I'm going to play a quick guessing game with you. 48% of his total fantasy points came in the first 6 weeks of the season, and he finished 4th at his position. Can you guess who he is?
In the first 6 weeks? I can't guess who it is, but the guy I have next finished 4th at his position, but I know it's not this guy. No, it's not this guy because his big stretch was later in the season. So okay. I don't know who your guy is.
It's Mark Andrews.
Okay. Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit last week.
Lamar Jackson would have been a better guess, but would have been my guess if he actually finished as the QB4.
It is disgusting what he did to you. If he was drafted,
that's why he was my LVP last week.
Yeah, he was drafted ahead of Kelsey by some people, and he was definitely right up there with Travis Kelsey. And the tight end 4 finish is probably the most fraudulent finish of any player on this list because going from week 7 onward, he has 2 top 10 finishes at tight end, which is of like 5 points is sometimes a top 10 finish at tight end.
Yeah, well, what I say last week, I think week 7 through 17, he was the tight end 15, something like that. Like over half the season, he was the tight end 15.
Yeah, he goes tight end 51, 23, 7, 11, 11, 23, 23, 18, and then he finishes the season at tight end 5. I mean, that's not a league winner. He was being taken ahead of guys like sometimes Tyreek Hill, sometimes AJ Brown, T. Higgins, like guys who are actually winning you your leagues. Even Travis Etienne, who I mentioned earlier, would have been a better pick than him.
Did he go ahead of Saquon Barkley anywhere? Maybe if he drafted really early, like July, maybe he did.
Yeah,
like a best ball draft in July.
This is one of the few times where you should have just taken Mahomes or Josh Allen at the 2-3 turn instead of this guy.
Yeah.
He definitely ruined roster constructions and is a real reason why you just shouldn't draft tight ends early, excluding the GOAT, Travis Kelsey.
Mm-hmm. If we're looking back on the season and we notice that a lot of that, or at least half of that, is without Lamar Jackson. I mean, what's that going to look like next year? Because I don't know if Lamar Jackson's exactly going to be back in Baltimore next season. So I think the long-term outlook for Andrews is pretty murky. And he was my LVP for a reason last week. He absolutely murdered fantasy managers past week 7 last year.
Yeah. Well, the locker room got less crowded for catching. He loses Devin Duvernay. He loses Rashad Bateman. And it's like, what are you doing? You're getting worse without clearly he's not a talented receiver at that level that he can dominate at like a complete alpha. Or they just weren't drawing the plays up for him. But either way, I think there needs to be some brakes pumped on where you take him next season, especially if you're looking at early tight end as a consideration.
Okay. This last guy, the brakes that I want pumped a little bit for next season. And just for us to remember, this season, this year's QB4. Can you guess who it is just based off of QB4?
Is it Justin Fields?
Yeah, it's Justin Fields.
Oh, yeah,
he finishes the QB4, and I mentioned this to you in our chat the other day. I've already seen some is Justin Fields the QB1 in fantasy next year, like in drafts, buzz starting on like YouTube videos and stuff, like really early content. And whether he's in Chicago or he's elsewhere, like he's going to be really good for fantasy. Like probably take him QB4, QB5, QB6, somewhere in that range. Like Kyler Murray's out. Herbert, depending on who his offensive coordinator is, like you can make the argument for him above those type of guys, obviously Murray and Herbert too, for sure. But he was truly an elite option this year for 5 weeks. Weeks 7 through 11, he was the QB1 overall, averaged 31.4 points per game. He had if you round up, a 43 and a 40-point game in that stretch. And his 3 others were all above 22. Like he was unbelievable, putting up video game rushing numbers in that stretch. But if you look at the other 2 large stretches of time that he played this season, weeks 1 through 6, he's the QB21, which, you can make the argument like, well, he just got better. Like the offense clicked in weeks 7 through 11, which it obviously did. And it was better down the stretch, but still weeks 13 through 17, he's the QB14. So not that I'm saying that's where you should go next year. And not that I'm saying that's what you should remember him as this year, because he was better than that, because that weeks 7 through 11, like it counts. Like it counts towards his total. He was unbelievable in that stretch. I just think he's going to have to make, we've talked about this, that Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts type of leap as a passer to validate the QB1, QB2 type of hype that I think he's clearly going to get going in the next season now. And on top of that, if he is in Chicago or elsewhere, he just has to have better weapons to throw to. That would make things a lot easier as well. But like for me, I see the list on Twitter where it's like the list of guys, like how many QB1 games they had, and it went down to 10 QB1 games. He wasn't on that list. I just want a guy I'm considering a QB1 or 2 overall to be a locked and loaded top 12 QB every week, obviously. And then like you want him to be a top 5 quarterback a lot, because they have to have that major positional advantage for you to pay off that early pick. And I'm afraid we're going to get a little carried away with Fields based on a good 5-week stretch, which it was good, but it was not so great at other points of the year.
Well, there's a lot of problems, I feel like, with the Justin Fields narrative. The first is we're getting a lot of, well, if you look at Josh Allen's first year and Jalen Hurts' first year, they were bad and they got better, and we liked them because they could run. The difference is, even for how bad, and I've been an off-season truther of both of those guys before they really blew up. Their completion rates above expectation were not good, but Justin Fields is significantly worse as a passer than these players. And the second thing is Justin Fields a lot of the times was getting these rushing yards in games where the defenses were rolling out. And Robert Mays on the Athletic Football Podcast does an incredible job pointing this out, that they were rolling out passing defenses because the Bears are down by 18 points. They're not spying the quarterback, and they're dropping 8 guys back and saying, just run the ball and run the clock. And that's all Justin Fields would do. He was getting easy looks because they're going in man coverage against bad wide receivers, and that gives easy looks for rushing quarterbacks. Everybody knows that if you're in a man coverage, everybody's back are turned to the quarterback, and he gets more yards. Am I going to take away him being a 1,000-yard rusher? No, but Lamar Jackson does those things, and Jalen Hurts does those things when they're zone coverages, and they get real read options. If you look up Justin Fields' rush yards, 70% of them were on scrambles. Ryan Poles and company, they weren't drawing up rush plays for him. He was just taking off when it was available. Those things year to year are much less consistent. And the big jump you saw in Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts was an addition of an alpha, like a real top 5 wide receiver to those offenses.
Yep.
Now, the Bears have the cap to do that. Maybe it's something they do. But even then, as a passer, he leaves a lot to be wanted. And his biggest problem that he still has is he holds the ball way too long. And that's just going to kill you in the NFL. And then we don't even know if he's going to be in Chicago, for God's sakes. They could still take CJ Stroud and let him go.
Yeah, or Bryce.
Bryce Young.
That would be the other option, obviously. To or Will Levis. Who knows? There's going to be a lot of conversation between then and now. But yeah, Fields is good, and for fantasy, he is really, really, really good. I just don't want to elevate him to great yet until I see it for a longer stretch, and we didn't yet this season. Anything else before we move on to some playoff talk here?
I mean, he'll be an off-season topic for us a lot, I'm sure. But I just really look at his passing stats and then ask yourself, and then compare them to Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts in their first years, and then ask yourself if you think he could make the same jump. And Lamar Jackson also had a trash supporting cast his first year. So that, like, let's not just use that excuse everybody's throwing out there that it was Dante Pettis and Darnell Mooney. Like, I just think Justin Fields has a lot of growth he needs as a passer, and I wouldn't be accommodating him as one. I saw a Dynasty take that he was the QB1 in Dynasty, which there's just so much wrong with that. I mean, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah. In Dynasty, I think it goes not necessarily in order, and we just did the show not too long ago, but I think ahead of him are Mahomes, Allen, Burrow. I'm still putting Herbert ahead of him in Dynasty.
I'd put Hurts ahead of him.
And I'd put Hurts ahead of him. And
Kyler probably. I know he's injured right
Kyler
now.
off the ACL, I don't know. I think he might. I can see the argument either way.
And maybe
Kyler.
even Trevor Lawrence now.
Trevor Lawrence possibly, and like Lamar Jackson, we didn't say that there's a lot of unknown there. So yeah, I think we're just getting a little carried away with Fields, even for as much fun as he is, as much as I like him. Like it's a lot of fun seeing a quarterback take a freaking running back toss play and run 20 yards. Like he is the best rusher on that team. And we like Khalil Herbert quite a bit, and they like David Montgomery quite a bit. So there's some other guys who can run the ball on that team, but Fields is the best rusher on that team, no doubt.
Absolutely.
All right. Divisional preview. We can bring Johnny back in for this. An update on last week. We were all 5-1 straight up. I went against my instinct, just like last year. I did this with the Cardinals, and it didn't work out. It's like, you know what? It's just like everybody gets that feeling in their gut when everybody is on one side of something. It's like it feels like I need to be on the other side. Somebody has to be on the other side. I took the Vikings, didn't work out, and then you guys took the Bucks, as we all know. That one didn't work out.
Allegedly,
again,
Grassgate.
Against the spread, I'm 4-2. You guys are 3-3. We obviously all of us missed on the Bengals and Bills games, both being close. If Lamar had played, I think we all would have taken the Ravens to at least cover. So that's a bad beat for us to have that not be a cover. And then you guys missed on the Bucks, and I actually had the Giants +3. So that's the difference there. As I split there, and we'll start with what I'm assuming will be the shortest of the games for us to talk about, and that's the first one, Jags at Chiefs. I'm sure we're all going to pick the Chiefs. Do we all have the Chiefs covering in this game? Dalton?
Dalton's awfully quiet.
Uh-oh. I have the Chiefs covering. It's a -8.5.
I know it's -8.5. I'm taking the Jags to actually cover.
Okay.
First of all, if the Chiefs blow them out by 28, I'll be very happy and I'll be like, fine. But
yeah, emotional hedge.
There's a lot of questions for me on how the special teams will lose this game for Kansas City. And on the other side of it, Jamal Agnew's been a really good special kick returner this offseason. And I'm just a little concerned our special teams is going to have a few of those blow it moments.
Well, the kick return is like the one way, kick return and punt return is like the one way the special teams has yet to cost the Chiefs. It's been,
that's why
it's been all the other stuff.
And then it's going to snow, and I can see Butker missing like 2 give-me field goals where Andy Reid doesn't go for on 4th and 1. Like that's really why I'm doing this. And if we go out and we blow them out, I'll be okay taking this loss on the chest because I think this is going to be a frustrating game, and I don't want it to be.
But you think Chiefs will still win, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think we still win.
Just confirming.
It's just a matter of I don't think we win very prettily, and I also think there's a lot of momentum coming from Jacksonville. They probably feel really strong after what they did last week.
It's possible. I mean, it's impossible to know how that will play out because you can make the argument like, oh, they're on top of the world after last week, they're rolling, and you could also say, well, they may still be on top of the world, and they may have forgotten they still have, the argument can go both ways in that scenario. So It's hard to know which will play out. Obviously.
This is also, I'm hedging against a backdoor cover against Andy Reid, who historically just lets off the gas. Like, we go into the fourth quarter up 21 and they score 2 touchdowns. It's like just an outcome.
I will say, just like thinking off the top of my head, to be very specific, the only divisional round game that Patrick Mahomes has not covered the spread in was when he got hurt and left the game early against the Browns. Every other divisional round game, they beat the Colts, I think 24-7. After being down 24-0, they beat the Texans by many touchdowns. So that was obviously a cover. And then the Bills game last year, I think they were favored by 1.5. I went back and looked at our document last year. So that was a cover in overtime, obviously.
Is this the biggest, other than the Colts game, the biggest spread? Well,
I would bet that Texans spread was pretty big.
But they had, I feel like they were they had Watson at that point. And that was
the Steelers one pretty big too.
That was wild card weekend last year.
Yeah,
Bills was divisional last year. So I will say, even though I have 8.5, the better play here is to find another game you like and tease this line down a little bit. Get it to less than a touchdown. Get it to where a field goal make or miss by Butker isn't going to probably swing your day if you can get it down to 6.5. Like that would be my actual play. For the purposes of this, though, I am taking the Chiefs, and I'll tell you why.
I'll tell you what.
I was listening to Times Ours, a Chiefs podcast, obviously, and Nate Taylor, Chiefs beat writer for The Athletic, he just kind of made the quick kind of side comment at the end of the podcast when they were nearing the conclusion. You know what the Jacksonville Jaguars defense has struggled with all season? Eye discipline and defending like motion plays, like plays like that. It's like, okay, well,
interesting.
Good luck against the Chiefs then. We remember the first time they played, obviously the Jags are playing a lot better than the first time. So I don't want to take everything that happened there and just carry it over to this game. That's not going to be probably how it goes. But remember, Tony was so wide open, he was screaming at Patrick Mahomes, motioning out of the backfield, and was able to hop down the sideline. That's the example that pops to mind about that. And then just like looking back at that game again, it's not going to happen the same way. Just because the Chiefs won by 10, then they're not going to win by 10 this time. But on their way to winning by 10, they, number one, accidentally elected to receive the kick when they never do that. The guy just got it wrong, then proceeded to get onside kicked on the first play of the game by Doug Peterson. So they're not going to get caught off guard that way again, you wouldn't think. Isaiah Pacheco fumbled deep in Chiefs or deep on a touchdown drive. Probably it was like in the red zone on a run. Jody Fortson fumbled a kick return. That was a squib. And the Jaguars, I believe, missed a field goal off of that, but still a turnover. And then Mahomes threw a late interception that then led to the Jaguars' touchdown when they were down 17. So the Chiefs, for all intents and purposes, had 4 turnovers. The Jaguars had 5 and won the other day. The Chiefs had basically 4 turnovers and won that game by 10 points and easily could have been 17 and kind of let their foot off the gas. I know the Jags are playing better. I just think the Chiefs are a better team, and we usually see a more sophisticated play sheet in the playoffs from the Chiefs than we do in the regular season. So I just think they're going to unveil some stuff, and they'll be too much for a young Jags team that I'm sure will be throwing the kitchen sink at the Chiefs, going for every 4th down they can. Like, I'm expecting probably a fake punt, fake field goal, like one of those two. Like, it's going to be a kitchen sink game from Doug Peterson because he onside kicked it in week 10 on the first play of the game. Like, it's going to be crazy, but I still think the Chiefs cover this one.
Over under 5 4th down attempts by the Jags. Going for it on 4th down.
I'll say under, just because most games you don't really get that many real opportunities at a 4th down. Like, I'll say this. If they top that number, they are either winning that game or losing by multiple touchdowns and are in desperation mode.
It's not a real line. I just definitely made it up. Would be fun if they had one.
But they're going to go for it a lot on 4th down.
It's going to be an annoying game, no matter what, because they're going to play us like the Bills played us.
And it's like that. Just number one, maybe should tell some people something about going for it versus not going for it on 4th downs. It makes it harder when you have to stop a team for 4 plays than 3. Like, just say it. All right.
That math?
That is math. Very loose math, but math. Anything else on this game before we move?
I do expect Christian Kirk to have a big game if you're betting anything. I don't know.
He had over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns in their first matchup. So that'd probably be a pretty safe bet. All right. Bengals at Bills. Bills on an 8-game winning streak.
We're just going out of order here, Chief?
Yeah, I'm going out of order. Why not? I'm going AFC first and then NFC. Bengals at Bills. Bills on an 8-game winning streak. Bengals on a 9-game winning streak. Dalton.
Well, there's a no contest in there for both teams. I feel like we're little suspect.
No, we're not doing that. Give me your take, Dalton, on this game.
I mean, okay, first of all, the line is surprising. Bills -5 was not my expectation. I know the Bengals.
I think it even opened at like -6 and quickly got bet down to the 4.5-5 range, which I wish I got it at -6. I should probably go get it while it's still 5 because we all think the Bengals cover. I'm assuming, right? Like
I'll take like Bengals +5.
Johnny, Bengals +5.
Yep.
Okay.
My problem with this game is both these teams didn't look good in the wild card weekend. Like they both had their own flaws. Like Cincinnati couldn't convert a third down to save their life and won on like one of the craziest fumble recoveries I've seen. Like Harrison's fumble recoveries up there with how crazy that one was. And then Josh Allen went mega Josh Allen and just decided to play like trash. Yeah, it's a bad one. Josh Allen is an emotional roller coaster to watch play football. And last week, I don't think they had any ups for that team. And then
it did. They were just like all in the first 8 minutes of the game, like first 10 minutes of the game.
And then on the other side of this, you're looking at the Bengals, who their offensive line now again looks like it did last season.
This is the third week in a row the Bengals have lost a starter, so they're now down 3 starters on, like I said earlier, was already the 28th ranked offensive line per PFF during the regular season.
Yeah, you don't like to see that.
Shout out Hakeem Adeniji getting the start at right tackle for the Jayhawks, now Bengals this week.
Rock chalk. There's also Kwame Lassiter and Buka on that team, so they have 3 Jayhawks.
Yep.
But I just don't like either team. I'm picking the Bills to win the game too. Because I think they're healthier and their pass rush can get to Joe Burrow. But in the end, I'm not as excited about this game as I was last week after watching both teams play horribly in the wild card round, in my opinion.
Johnny?
Yeah, I'm going Bills too. I just feel like the Bengals are so banged up, and I just feel like the Bills is just on the team of destiny, just doing it for DeMar. I feel like they just aren't going to lose this game, but it's going to be a pretty close. Whoever has the ball last kind of will win the game, one possession game, and I think Bills win by 3.
And Johnny does have the Bills in the Super Bowl. So.
Yeah, I mean, but to be fair, we have the right to change that pick throughout the playoffs. Like if you want to pick against that team, obviously you can. But yeah, I figured Johnny was probably going Bills. I think I'm going Bengals here. I'm going Bengals straight up. I said that I was probably going to last week. The left tackle getting hurt and not playing this week obviously throws a wrench into things. But Dalton, you mentioned the Bills pass rush. How about this stat for you? With Von Miller, the Bills ranked 4th in the NFL in pressure rate with 4 pass rushers or less. You want to take a guess at where they rank since the Von Miller injury?
16th.
Any guesses, Johnny?
24.
27th in the NFL in
That's
pressure
bad.
rate with 4 or less guys since Von Miller went down. I know the offensive line is a concern, but I mean, it's been a concern even with those guys getting hurt. I think they've proven to be so good with the quick passing game that, it's not how you would like to play with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Have you looked at Jamar Chase's route tree from last week?
No, is it sad?
It's hilarious and yes, sad. And part of it is because it's the Ravens, which we talked about this last week in that preview. Burrow had played 2 of his worst games against the Ravens because they take away the deep stuff that he likes to do and really makes them go underneath. I'm going to try and share my screen here and get that's his route tree. Look at all those sticks, all of those curls, nothing past 20 yards last week. It was for a guy who's like the ultimate downfield weapon. that's what they had to play last week. That's the way they're probably playing this week. But I don't know, man. I just something feels off with this Bills team to me. Like they've had 3 straight weeks of 3 turnovers. And if they even have multiple turnovers, I think the Bengals are 6-0 in games where they force 2 or more turnovers this season. Like if the Bills turn this out, like this feels like to me it's going to come down to turnovers, and that makes me very nervous for the Bills, who like were turning it over a lot in the last couple of games, and Allen leads the NFL in total turnovers this year with, I believe, 19 if you include fumbles. Obviously, we know Dak.
Josh Allen, leave him alone.
Obviously, we know Dak led the league in total interceptions, but the fumbles snuck up with Allen. I was reading the Bills beat writer report from that game, like a 7 things on The Athletic, and there seems to be some real concern in Buffalo with their offensive coordinator, Ken Dorsey, and mainly what came to a head last week is him making adjustments or kind of lack thereof. Basically, he said the Dolphins which we all saw this. The Dolphins started the game last week blitzing, like every play blitzing, like as often as they could, it felt like, and it wasn't working. And then they started really mixing it up. They were dropping guys in coverage and blitzing very, very, very infrequently. But it completely flummoxed the Bills. Like Josh Allen completed only half of his passes against a rush of 4 or fewer players from the second quarter on last week. On his 20 throws against non-blitzes, he averaged 17.9 yards per attempt. On his 10 incompletions, he was 25.6 air yards on those attempts. Like, check it down, man. Oh my God. Like, check it down. like the Bills were clearly puzzled by that adjustment. I mentioned Diggs only had 1 target in the second half because the Dolphins just were like, okay, we're going to take away Stephon Diggs. Like, I know the Bengals secondary isn't exactly a beacon of health right now with now Eli Apple hurt, and just their secondary hasn't been playing especially well the last couple of weeks. Like the Ravens threw the ball decently well last week. That wouldn't be a great sign to me if you're facing the Bills, but I just, when it comes down to it, I trust this Bengals team more than the Bills right now. And I think this is, like Johnny said, going to be a who has the ball last situation. And I just think the Bills are more primed to make that killer mistake than the Bengals are.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. First, it is interesting that the 4 rushers are affecting Josh Allen, which is also PTSD time. How the Bengals have beat the Chiefs 3 times in a row is they use 4 rushers. We
know the Bengals are very adept at that. Yes, so that brings a little pause.
The one caveat to that with the Miami game is I think the Bills for most of the game felt like they were going to win, and they weren't using Josh Allen as a runner at all. He had 2 design rushes the entire game. They both came in the fourth quarter when it was like, oh, we might actually lose the game. And that, I think that does affect the 4-man rush when Josh Allen's able to use his legs like that. But I'm definitely concerned. It's just I can see Josh Allen having the 3 turnover game, and I can also see him going out and going 28 for 31 for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
And I just like that range of outcomes better. And I think the Bills' defense is a little stouter than the Bengals at this point when you look at the injuries.
I don't know, man. Everybody is moving the ball up and down the field on the Bills lately. Have you noticed that? Like
there's been no break.
Like the Patriots move the ball up and down the field. The Patriots. The Jets.
Bears didn't.
The only other team that the Patriots really did that to this season was the Vikings, who have a terrible defense as well. Like the Bengals defense has not been good. I think they're maybe going to get Micah Hyde back this week. So if that does happen, that'd be a boost. But the series or the sequence that I just have engraved into my head outside of the turnovers is, they get a ball, a pretty key drive late in the game. First down, deep shot to Gabe Davis, overthrown. Second down, with Gabe Davis clearly tired and clearly nothing else there. What does Josh do? Deep shot to Gabe Davis again. And that's also probably partially the offensive coordinator's fault for like, hello, man, like make an adjustment, call a different play, like give us something where we can just get 6 or 7 yards maybe. And he overthrows them, and then the Bills are off the field. Like I just have concerns with this team, with the turnovers, with the ability to adjust. Like the Bengals proved last year that they can give really good quarterbacks problems by just dropping a lot of guys and being a stout run defense. And the Bengals are a stout run defense. Like I don't think Devin Singletary is going to be going off for 90 yards and giving the Bills a big boost in this game. So it's a toss up. Home field matters a lot. I just trust the Bengals more at this point.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference. Is I still trust the Bills more. I think the Bills were in more control of that Miami game than the Bengals were in control of that Baltimore game.
I don't know, man. I don't know. Neither team was really in very great control. But
I know, but they only scored 24 points, and one of them was 7 given to them by that Tyler Huntley trying to stretch across. Like, I feel like you got to score more on the Baltimore Ravens than that, especially when they're rolling out Tyler Huntley.
Yeah, but again, the Ravens had been a tough matchup for the Bengals the first 2 times, so not shocking to see them kind of struggle offensively a little bit in that game. I digress. You guys have Bills straight up, Bengals cover. I have Bengals cover, Bengals straight up, and that will probably be my most anticipated game of the weekend outside being a Chiefs fan. Of course, Giants at Eagles. This one is Eagles minus 7.5. And I got to tell you, the old Giants, good teams win, great teams cover. They did both last week. I don't think they're doing both this week, but they looked pretty good last week. And I think I'm pretty comfortable in going with an Eagles win and a Giants cover in this scenario. Like I think this one stays within 1 touchdown. The Vikings defense, I know, I just mentioned, is very bad. It's quite bad. But I was legitimately impressed with Daniel Jones last week. Like he played well. He was great as a rusher. I just if you're talking about them winning the game, I can't get there with their lack of weapons. Like they're not going to go win this game. And he is going to have to make plays in more adverse situations this week because of the pass rush, because of just a better secondary, everything. But I think this is a very, very, very well-coached team. This is a very confident team, and they're a dangerous team because, what's the one way we've seen this team get beaten this year with Jalen Hurts in the lineup? It's when the Washington Commanders just grinded them into the ground with a running game with Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. I don't think it's going to happen, but is it in the range of outcomes for Saquon and Daniel Jones to do something like that and make this game very close? Yeah, I think so. And that's kind of where I'm at.
I wish I could snapshot the first 3 sentences out of your mouth talking about Daniel Jones and show them to Evan from August of 2022
It's amazing.
I'm taking the Eagles to cover, and I'm taking the Eagles to win, obviously. Just on a note of the Washington game, the Eagles didn't have Jordan Davis, who's like their premier run stuffer, and he is obviously healthy for this game. A couple of things here. One, my favorite country artist, Zach Bryan, promised he would release a new song if the Eagles won because he's a huge Eagles fan. So,
yeah, but he didn't say they had the cover, did he?
Maybe they cover and he doubles down. Like, you don't know. He could release 2 songs. So taking them, but the same thing, like the Eagles are entirely healthy. Like even Jalen Hurts off the injury report. This team got bogged down by injuries to end the season and still finished pretty well. I know.
Can I just say, I know Hurts is off the injury report. One of my questions for this game, though, is Hurts truly unleashed like he was before? Like, is he running the read option? Is he keeping? Is he getting that 10 rushing attempts in a game? Because he clearly, I don't know if he wasn't able to do that in Week 18 or if they just didn't want to do that in Week 18 against backups. But that is just a question mark because we don't know. We haven't seen him run like that since he got hurt.
Yes, but I do have faith in. You talked about the skill position players, the New York Giants. I have a lot of faith in the Eagles not letting Isaiah Hodgins, who joined week
Look,
12,
man, that guy is like legitimately pretty good.
He went 9 for 93 to touchdown, and he started playing football for them in week 12. I'm not saying he's not good.
Look,
I'm saying
Look,
like
hold on, what's more impressive, that or Kenny Galladay getting on the field and pancaking somebody? Like Kenny Galladay making plays out there.
Well,
That's how you know it's a well-coached team.
And I just have to believe they're not going to let Daniel Jones run for almost 100 yards. They're gonna put a spy on him if they have to. I think the defensive side of the ball is coached better, and Nick Sirianni, if we weren't seeing Brian Dabble do the impossible with this Giants team, I think Nick Sirianni probably is the other front runner for Coach of the Year in a very crowded pool with what he's done for the Eagles.
But it should be Dabble.
Absolutely. I don't disagree with that.
This team made no free agent acquisitions of any kind. They went into the season, they're thinking, okay, they're going to be cutting guys. They're going to have like Kenny Galladay, weighing down their cap. It's like, this is a transition year. Once we get to 2023, 24, like this team can maybe start making some moves, taking some steps forward. This is just a transition year. Let's get going in the right direction. Like, no, this is a legitimate playoff team, which, by the way, every time the Giants make the playoffs now, they just go to the Super Bowl, right? Like every time they win a game in the playoffs, they haven't won a playoff game before now since 2011.
You're doing like my Tom Brady thing from last week.
So I'm not taking the win just to cover 7.5.
This just comes like, I think both coaching staffs are incredibly talented. It's just that the Eagles coaching staff also has incredibly talented players, top to bottom on both sides of the ball, and the Giants really don't have talented players. No offense to them or to anybody who plays football for them, but Saquon Barkley and nobody else is the talent profile in this
team. I don't know. Dexter
Lawrence, yes.
That guy is flat out incredible. Our guy Jason Kelsey is going to have himself not a fun day on the interior against him. Did you see his mic'd up, by the way? Have you watched?
Talking about Pilates?
And he tells their center that you're hugging me more than my girlfriend. Like, like after a play, he's the best. I do wonder, and Johnny, I'll let you get your take off in a minute here. I wonder what the record is against the spread and just straight up for that matter. Like, let's just go from the favorites perspective of a divisional matchup, like for the third time in the playoffs. I mean, not to say that just because we saw it last week, it's going to happen again this week, but we just saw two divisional matchups that were a lot closer than we thought last week. And you just wonder about seeing a team a third time. Like it's just tough to play a team that many times in a season.
Yeah, but we also saw the Niners play the Seahawks for the third time.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Stomped them.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know. I would just be curious, like, to know. Maybe I'll have to Google this later. It just kind of came to me now. Like, I just wonder what the record against the spread, I'll say, is for the favorite in those matchups. Because it to me feels like it always, it feels like it favors the underdog to get who has lost twice to get a third shot at that team.
Yeah. Well, and then week 18's weird in and of itself. The Giants didn't play anybody. Davis Webb played. The Eagles did play guys. And I mean, if you are trying to count your eggs on this one, that might be beneficial to the Giants, having seen the Eagles twice. And technically the Eagles have seen the Giants once.
Mm-hmm. Johnny, I see that you've already put in the doc. You've got Eagles and Eagles. So let's hear it.
Yep. I think Jalen's going to kind of let it rip. I think he's just going to be exactly what we saw, probably not like full before injury, but I think he's going to look sharp and good against the Giants defense. And I think the Eagles are going to backdoor cover. I think they're going to be up 7 kind of the whole game, play it pretty close, and last minute just kind of like 4 or 5 minutes left, kick a field goal, go up 10, and then just kind of close it out.
Very possible. The one thing you always worry about with the Eagles in like a big home game is if things aren't going well and then that crowd turns against them, like things can go really strong in a certain direction, good or bad for the Eagles in any given home big game. So that's just something to watch out for on both sides. Like it wouldn't surprise me if this was a 3-touchdown game or if the Eagles are down by 4 points with a minute left with the ball. I could easily see either one of those scenarios playing out. Okay. I think we saved what is probably not the best game in my mind, but this will be the most talked about game because it's Brock Purdy, it's the Niners, and then we've got the Cowboys. Like that, it'll be the most talked about game, the most bet on game, I'm sure, of any of these. This is Cowboys at 49ers, I believe. I checked it again tonight. It is still Niners 3.5. Last I saw. Johnny, I'll kick it to you on your take on this game to start.
Yeah, I'm riding Niners pretty high. I think Niners win. I think Niners cover. I think Brock Purdy definitely overcame a lot after he just played horrendous in that first half. He looked as bad as I've probably reminded me of like what he looked like at Iowa State.
He was jittery for sure. He was missing throws. He was definitely jittery.
Yep. And then I think he just came back pretty perfectly. The coaching staff kind of put him in the right position with the right plays with Debo and just kind of got him more comfortable to make the right plays, make the right checkdowns. And I just don't think the Cowboys can do what they did last week with this 49ers defense.
Dalton?
Yeah, no, I'm solidly taking the 49ers to cover. This is the most absurd line of the weekend. In my
Really? So I don't think it's absurd. I think it's a pretty good line.
Wow. Well, a few things. One, a third of Brock Purdy's passes last week were to people who had 5 yards of separation. Like this, Kyle Shanahan is giving him some incredibly easy looks. And at the same time, I already see a sluggo route for Debo Samuel when he's guarded by Trayvon Diggs. And because it's Brock Purdy, Trayvon Diggs is going to jump the route and Debo Samuel's going to get an 80-yard touchdown. I'm calling that now. I'm ready to bet on that. And then the strengths of this Cowboys defense really are Micah Parsons, and it's really well neutralized by probably a top 5 offensive line, and more importantly, Trent Williams for the 49ers. So I don't know how often Micah Parsons is going to be able to get home. And then circle of wagons, boys. Do you know what kind of field the San Francisco 49ers play on?
Nobody circles the wagons like Dalton talking about grass.
Because it's a grass field. And you can be an outlier once, and that's because the Bucs were incredibly bad. This Niners team is not incredibly bad. So Cowboys 2-4 on grass fields. 2-4. And worst part about all of this,
I think it's funny that this got airtime on the broadcast last week, and they were laughing about it. And I thought McCarthy actually did kind of make what I thought was a solid point, which is like, well, when we play our home games on turf, yeah, we're probably going to have a worse record on grass. It's fair.
But my last and final point, and I do think this is important, they played Monday night on the East Coast, and they have to travel to the West Coast first. And they have less rest. They're going to be traveling cross country, and those do impact teams, which is one of the reasons why I'm confidently taking plus 3.5. Because
the fact that this is the fact that the Niners played the first game and were had a chance to play the winner of the last game. Like I know
it's a schedule.
I know there's no way to predict because they probably thought the Vikings were gonna win, I guess, but it's just the fact this is why we shouldn't have Monday games. We shouldn't have teams playing with 2 days difference in rest.
Yeah. And then I really don't want to bet on Dak Prescott. Last week was his first ever 4-touchdown game in the playoffs. And Brock Purdy had 4 touchdowns his first game of the playoffs. Same, in my opinion.
So I am taking the Niners to win the game.
Please don't take the Cowboys. Please don't. I just can't respect you as a bettor if you take the Cowboys.
I took them last week and they won.
I know. And first win in 25 years.
All right, we'll be quick and then
You're just giving the Bucs their money back that they won last week.
Yeah. I'm taking the Niners to cover as well, but I had to think about this pretty long and pretty hard. I don't think the line is going to tilt more than the Niners' favor because the people are just going to bet on the Cowboys because that's just what happens. They're the most public team in the biggest league in America. They're probably going to stay at 3.5. But if this were to get to 4.5, I think I would take the Cowboys. If we could get this another point. I do think this will be a close game. You guys mentioned Purdy. Johnny, you mentioned that he didn't really play well in the first half. If you guys haven't read it, you should go check it out. Tim Wynn for The Athletic wrote what I thought was a great piece this week, really breaking down Purdy's performance. And the conclusion, as Johnny kind of alluded to, is that Purdy was not nearly as good as his insane numbers indicated. Now, not to say he was bad, not to say he himself is bad, but there were guys open, like you mentioned, all in space all game, whether it was Debo on that deep cross, Debo breaking 1 million tackles for an 80-yard touchdown run, like CMC doing CMC things. Like Shanahan is scheming his ass off right now, and it was fully on display last week. His completions above expected it was actually at a negative 0.5. So he was slightly below what was expected of him last week in terms of what was actually out on the field for him to gain, basically. Like, even if this situation is probably the most ideal quarterback situation you can find, he's still playing pretty well, though. Like, by and large, I think he's still playing pretty well. I think we can all agree he's a pretty good player, and the Niners can definitely win with him as their quarterback. Like, where he stands apart from Jimmy G is with 3 or more seconds in the pocket, he is toward the top of the NFL. So basically, like, he can freelance a little bit. Jimmy G was 24th this year, and like Purdy at least gives them a little bit of an added dimension. What I do worry about at some point is if the Shanahan scheme isn't enough, like if Purdy just has to start making some plays. And I think that's possible in a game with Micah Parsons on the defensive line. I just don't trust the Cowboys secondary enough to make that happen. And I do think like the Niners defense will probably make some plays against Dak. Like that'll probably happen. And that's why I'm taking the Niners to cover.
You're taking the Niners to cover?
Yeah, I said Niners to cover at the beginning.
Interesting. I really thought you were going to go Dallas here.
No, I said at the beginning Niners to cover, but I just want to lay out the case as to why like it's close. I think it's going to be a close game. I don't feel incredibly confident in this line like you do.
Oh, the Niners have the best rush defense, and there's just part of me that just knows McCarthy and co are going to go out there, and for 4 drives we're going to see Zeke get 4 carries, and it's going to be
that really didn't happen. Like Tony Pollard got more carries last week.
I know, which is why it's going to happen this week. And if they shut down that explosive run game, it's really just CeeDee Lamb that we have to worry about doing well. And
I thought it was interesting that Aikman opened up that game basically saying that it needs to be Pollard getting more touches than Zeke. So it's like, well, if Aikman is saying this on TV, I bet he's been telling Jerry Jones this in private channels. Like, hey, man, you need to get this guy the ball more than Zeke. Like, I think that's probably been happening.
For the sake of Cowboys fans, I hope so. But I think this is a more well-coached team. You both are frozen, so I paused. I think this is a more well-coached team. When you're frozen, it means I'm frozen.
We can still hear you the whole time, so you're good.
I think it's a more well-coached team, top to bottom. I think defensively, they're going to give them fits. And I think there's, like, Dak Prescott is going to absolutely get obliterated on national television Sunday night. I think it's going to be a all-out, just terrible case for Dak. And we're going to walk away asking ourselves, like we're at the start of the season, if this guy really should be getting paid franchise quarterback money.
So if I gave you an alt line of Seahawks minus 9.5, what would you take?
Dallas?
Take that? No, Seahawks minus 9.5.
Seahawks,
geez. 49ers. I was thinking of the line last week. Seahawks 49ers. 49ers minus 9.5. You could probably make pretty good money if you bet that and won.
I like it. I'm going to look that up after this and I slap 25 on it. I legitimately, and I've had this standpoint since the start of the season, I just don't believe in this Dallas Cowboys team, and I still don't. And I think
they're a good team. Like, they're 12-5. I think they're a good team that is just prone to some Cowboys things. But the Cowboys, what they don't usually do is get blown out in the playoffs. What they usually do is things like last year where they lose a close game because something incredibly dumb happens to them.
Yes, like running the ball with no timeouts left and 10 seconds on the clock. No, I think I would probably take the 9.5. I don't think this is going to be a terribly close game. See, like I will look up that alternate line. Like,
this isn't like my favorite. Like, this is probably the game that I'm staying away from the most of any of them. But, you know, if I want, like, I don't hate doing a little NFC East underdog action here and going like Giants plus 10.5 and Cowboys plus 6.5. Parlay that, I bet you could get like plus 100.
NFC beast.
3 of the 4 in the division still playing.
All right, we're gonna go look at these odds. John, do you have anything else to say while I look at this odd?
No.
Dalton, you have about 10 seconds to find it, and if not, we're closing.
Finding an alternate spread is harder than I thought.
No, it's not. It should literally take you less than 20 seconds. If
2,
I beat you to this,
1.
hold on. Let me give me a chance.
All right, you have a 15-second extension.
So I can take. John, I need your help here.
Yeah, no, I can't find it either. It only goes to like
I know.
minus.
Well,
yeah, we can.
You, the user, can look this up on your own. Niners minus 9.5. That is the Dalton.
It's plus 198. That's not even that good.
That's plus odds. Betting on the Niners plus odds. That is going to do it for episode 99 of the Half Point Per Podcast. We're going to be at 100 next week talking about the AFC and NFC championship games. Hopefully it is a Chiefs preview for show number 100 next week. Give us a follow on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Half Point Per Pod. We've been known to old takes expose ourselves on there as of late. Link to all of those things in the show notes as always. The show is available anywhere you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, all of that good stuff. We will talk to you guys with what should be a very fun preview next week, and hopefully looking back on a very fun weekend of football this week. Thank you for listening, and talk to you all very soon.